Andrea Leadsom.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. So, just to be clear then, value for money for the taxpayer doesn't come into the HS2 project?
No, I'm not saying that at all. It does, of course it comes in. I think it is, in fact, that is the whole basis of the announcements that I made about this in the spending round, which is about ensuring that this project is delivered to budget, taking some of the lessons from the Olympics, for example, where we set out a funding package for the term of the project, and where we build in robust incentives for those delivering the project to deliver it not just to time but under budget as well. And so in a sense I'd say the step we made on HS2 in the spending round was about financial control and delivery on the basis that our collective judgment is that this is something which is good for the economy and therefore good value for the taxpayer.
So do you then refute the NAO's report expressing concerns particularly about the assumption that time spent travelling at the moment is unproductive, but under HS2 time spent travelling on train will always be productive at an average salary of £70,000 per annum? Do you feel that that's a reasonable assumption? Is that something that will be reassessed at the next financial assessment of HS2?
Well, look, I would say that I think the analysis suggests that this is the sole basis on which HS2 is understood. I do refute. I'd say that the appraisal and analysis that's been done on HS2 is completely consistent with what is done by DfT for all rail projects and with international best practices. You can look at the price that people, particularly business people, are prepared to pay to travel as another proxy for this, and that would also show that there is a strong value attached to higher speed journeys. I'd also say that the specific analysis of transport projects does not in general take into account the much wider economic benefits of these sorts of projects. And so if I can just make one further point, we simply followed the economic model in the way you're suggesting. This country might not have built the M1 in the 1960s, for example, or completed the M25 in the 1980s. These are transformational projects which go beyond just the travel time benefits of a particular rail service.
Yes, but I think the point is that you would have to accept is that the broader economic benefits aren't known until they're known. And of course, with a motorway, it has lots of things called junctions, where with high speed 2, it has a beginning and an end,
and
very few stop-offs. Yeah, 1 or 2 stop-offs. But if you're challenging the NAO's report, and according to NAO guidelines, each report is signed off by key departments, including the Department for Transport. So the Department for Transport's Permanent Secretary would have cleared this report before it was published. So where does that leave the position that time spent travelling is unproductive? Because that is a significant part of the benefit of to taxpayers of the project, is it not? So the Department for Transport would have signed off the report, but now you refute its findings.
What I was saying is that I think that too much burden in the public debate has been based on this particular facet of the analysis.
It is a financial case is very largely based on the time spent on a train having a value.
This is one of a number of things that are taken into account. As I say, the methodology used is the same methodology used for appraising all rail projects. We're investing in rail projects all around the country. This is not costing us investment in the Northern Harbour and the railway stations around this country. And as I say, there is another proxy you can use for that question, which is what price are people prepared to pay for tickets, and the analysis done there.
What I'm asking you is, did the Department for Transport sign off on the NAO report that you're now refuting?
I don't know the specific answer to that question. I would, as I say, I would not characterise what I'm saying as refuting the NAO report. What I'd say is that I think that too much burden is being placed on this particular point in terms of trying to criticise the HS2 project, when, as I said earlier, I think that there is a very, very strong economic case for HS2 as a project that can transform the economic geography of the United Kingdom in the way that, for example, the advent of the railways in Victorian times did then.
OK, so then just looking, the Adam Smith Institute has noted that UK high-speed rail costs per kilometre are up to 4 times that on the continent, because we've got so many
Sorry, the cost, did you say? I missed.
The cost per kilometre of HS2 are up to 4 times as much as costs on the continent. Does that have a bearing on the value for taxpayers' money for high-speed rail in the UK?
Well, it certainly has a bearing on the approach that we're taking to try and control the costs, because of course you're right, as the Secretary of State of Transport has told the House of Commons, that there have been cost increases based on things like tunnelling work, changes at Euston Station, and so on. And those things all have to be factored into the cost. The approach we're taking now is to say that, having done all that work, we're setting a budget for the project, £42.6 billion. It's a lot of money. It's the largest budget I think there's ever been for an individual project in this country. We are setting up the incentives within the project for the people delivering the project to ensure that they deliver under budget, taking the best lessons from the successful delivery of the Olympic Park, asking Lord Dighton, who's joined the government, who was involved in delivering that project, to take a role in ensuring the delivery of this project. And I think that's the right balance.
Yeah.
If your wider point is, do we have is it more costly to deliver infrastructure in this country? The answer is yes. We published an infrastructure cost review 2 or 3 years ago. We've been engaged in a piece of work with the construction sector to try and look at the cost benchmarks for infrastructure projects in the UK compared to other parts of Europe, for example. And we're taking a whole series of steps to try and bring those costs down. That's one of many ways in which we can get better value for the taxpayers' money.
So how far do costs have to rise before the cost-benefit analysis for HS2 just collapses? We already had, in the original 30 billion for the total project, 17 for phase 1, what we were told was a 30% optimism bias, which in most people's terms would mean contingency, and yet only last week we've announced another 40% contingency on top of what was already a 30% contingency bias. So clearly the costs are escalating. The government lost a judicial review on fair compensation. Do you expect the cost of compensation now to escalate? And at what point will the cost-benefit analysis just make it unviable?
Well, I'm not looking for the cost to increase. I'm looking for this project to be delivered within and ideally under the budget that we have set. That's why, though the P95 estimate for phase 1 is 21.4 billion, that's within the 42.6 overall estimate. We've given HS2 Limited a target price for delivering phase 1 of 17.16 billion. It's meeting that price that the people who are running HS2 will be incentivised to deliver. So far from planning for further cost growth, the approach to budgeting we're setting out here is precisely about trying to apply the best lessons of how to manage these big projects to deliver it within the budget that's been set aside.
Okay, final question. John Tumaney, Professor of Urban and Regional Planning at UCL, said that the evidence for high-speed rail to transform the economic geography of the UK is fairly weak, and that where you have a dominant capital and you connect that dominant capital to peripheral cities and regions by high-speed rail, the bulk of the gains accrue to the capital. So what evidence is there that disputes that?
Look, I think probably it'd be best for that question to be addressed to the Department for Transport. I can only say that I represent a small city, a very long way from London, and where the connectivity for Inverness to London is a crucial part, not of, I'm sure it's important to London's economy, it's absolutely critical to the economy of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, as I dare say John would agree. And I suspect that sort of lesson applies right the way across the country and benefits both ends of the line, not just one.